You know, when we think about the history of major tech breakthroughs, the setting is almost always the same. It's a sunny garage in California, or maybe, I don't know, a pristine lab at MIT. But the story we're digging into today, the origin of how computers learn to read the most important language on Earth, it starts somewhere much colder.
It really does. It starts with this very specific, very high-stakes anxiety in the late 1940s.
We are talking about the dawn of the Cold War.
Right. So you have to picture it. World War II is over. The Iron Curtain is coming down.
Yeah.
And Western scientists and intelligence agencies, they have this terrifying realization. The Soviets are publishing incredible, groundbreaking science.
Physics, chemistry.
Rocketry, all of it.
Yeah.
But there was this huge bottleneck.
Nobody in the West could read Russian.
Exactly. I mean, the entire U.S. scientific community was, for all intents and purposes, illiterate when it came to Soviet journals. So it had stacks of this potentially game-changing info just sitting there, locked.
So in 1949, a man named Warren Weaver writes this famous memorandum. And he proposed something that sounded like, well, science fiction. He said, we shouldn't just train more human translators. We should use these new computers to do it automatically.
And that right there was the birth of machine translation.
It was. But here's the twist. Today, we aren't talking about spies. We're not talking about nuclear physics. We're talking about medicine. We're talking about bio-NLP, biomedical natural language processing.
Which feels like a huge jump.
Yeah.
How do you get from hunting for Soviet secrets to, what, organizing hospital records? Well, the mission is actually strangely similar. Back then, the goal was national security. You needed to find the needle in the haystack of Soviet data. Today, as the source material for this deep dive points out, and this comes from a really comprehensive overview by Kevin B. Cohen, the stakes are arguably much higher. The goal of BioNLP, it's not just organization, it is to reduce preventable human pain and suffering.
That is a massive mandate for a piece of software. And I want to get into the how of that, because I think most people assume medicine is already pretty digitized. You go to the doctor, they type on a laptop, it all goes into a system. Why is reading medical text still such a huge unresolved problem?
It really comes down to two things, volume and messiness. And the volume is just, it's staggering. We are not looking at a few hundred papers anymore. With genome sequencing, biology moved from studying one gene at a time to tens of thousands all at once.
I was looking at the stats in our notes. There are something like 2,000 new abstracts published every single day.
Every single day. Think about that. No human being, no doctor, no researcher, no matter how much coffee they drink, can read 2,000 papers a day. You could be the most dedicated oncologist in the world, and you would still miss critical information that might save your patient, just because it was buried in paper number 1,999 that came out that morning.
So we've basically reached a point where human biological knowledge is expanding faster than human bandwidth?
Precisely. We are drowning in data, but starving for knowledge. So we need machines to read it for us. But here's a catch. Teaching a machine to read biology is infinitely harder than teaching it to read, say, a Wikipedia article.
Okay, let's break that down, because I'm sure someone listening is thinking, I can Google my symptoms right now. If I type headache, Google gets it. Why doesn't that work for a hospital database?
Because Google is usually dealing with generalities. In medicine, specificity is everything, and the language is, well, surprisingly ambiguous. Let's just take the word cold.
Cold.
If a standard search engine sees cold in a patient's chart, what does it mean? Does it mean the patient has a runny nose, the common cold? Or does it mean the patient said they felt physically cold, shivers, which could be a sign of shock? Or is the doctor describing a cold nodule on a thyroid scan, which has a completely different radiological meaning?
Huh. I hadn't even thought of that. To a human, the context makes it obvious, but to a keyword search, cold is just C-O-L-D. It's just a string of text.
Exactly. And that's a simple example. The source material highlights what we can call the impossible query. This is where the gap between human understanding and computer logic really becomes a canyon.
This was the example about the breast cancer search, right? I spent some time trying to get my head around this one.
It's a classic. Imagine a clinician is looking for candidates for a clinical trial. They go to the database and type, female patients with breast cancer with mastectomies during admission.
Sounds straightforward. Pretty specific, even.
Grammatically, sure. But for a computer, logically, it's a minefield. First, just look at the phrase, during admission. That's what we call a temporal constraint. It's about time. The computer has to look at a patient's history and distinguish a mastectomy that happened during this hospital stay versus a mention of one that happened 10 years ago.
Right, because the note could easily say, Patient admitted for pneumonia, history of mastectomy in 2015. If the computer just sees mastectomy and admission in the same document, it grabs it, but that's wrong.
Totally wrong for the trial. It fails on the timeline. And then you have the word female.
Which should be the easy part. It's a checkbox.
You'd think. But in a lot of medical notes, especially free text, the patient's gender isn't explicitly stated in every sentence, it's just implied. Or the query implies adult, but it doesn't say adult. A human knows we're not looking for toddlers with breast cancer. A computer doesn't know that unless you teach it inference.
So the machine has to learn to read between the lines. It has to understand the world of medicine, not just the words.
Correct. And this isn't just a problem for doctors. We have to talk about the bench scientists and the database curators.
I loved that term, database curators. It sounds like they work in a museum dusting off dinosaur bones, but they're just drowning in digital paperwork.
They are the unsung heroes of modern biology. I mean it. They are the ones trying to take all those 2,000 daily papers and manually extract the findings.
Yeah.
It's a thankless, overwhelming job. Without Bio-NLP tools to automate that, to read the papers for them, they're just fighting a losing battle.
So we have overwhelmed humans and confused computers. But the other thing that really stood out to me was the text itself. I think we have this image of medical records as being very formal, very precise.
And that is mostly a myth. You actually have two different worlds here. You've got the scientific literature, the journals, those are polished. The sentences are long, complex, but they follow the rules.
And then you have the clinical notes.
The Wild West. Clinical notes, whether they're scrawled by hand or typed into the laptop during a 12-hour shift, are a disaster zone for a linguist. They're hasty, fragmented, and just full of slang and abbreviations.
The abbreviations were my favorite part of this. We have to talk about WNL.
The WNL problem. So officially, in any textbook, WNL stands for within normal limits.
Which is good. You want your test to be WNL.
Theoretically. But doctors, being, human and often cynical, have this long-standing joke that WNL actually stands for we never looked.
Which is funny, but also terrifying if you're the patient.
It just highlights the ambiguity again. Did the doctor check and it was fine, or did they skip it? The computer has no way to know.
But sometimes the abbreviations aren't jokes, they're just dangerous collisions. Take PDA.
Okay, not public display of affection, I'm guessing?
Not in a cardiology ward, no. If you're a cardiologist, PDA usually means patent ductus arteriosus. It's a congenital heart defect, a hole in the heart, serious stuff.
However, it's also the standard abbreviation for the posterior descending artery. That's just a normal blood vessel. It's part of the plumbing.
Yeah.
So you have one acronym that means critical heart defect.
And also totally normal body part.
Yeah.
And the computer has to figure out which one it is.
Based entirely on context. It's a high-stakes guessing game.
It sounds like doctors have their own dialect. They even make up words. I saw that example of a word that's not even in the dictionary. Reheparinize.
Ah, yes. So heparin is a blood thinner. To heparinize someone is to put them on it. To reheparinize is to put them back on it.
Makes perfect logical sense.
It does. It follows all the rules of English. But if your software is relying on a standard dictionary, reheparinize just comes up as an error. It's a neologism, a new word invented on the hospital floor.
And then on top of all that chaos, you have just typos?
Oh, the typos are rampant. One study of ICU notes, so intensive care units where people are really rushing, found that up to 8% of the words the computer couldn't recognize were just simple spelling mistakes.
So the computer's trying to analyze a complex case, and it gets stuck because a tired doctor typed aspirin wrong.
Exactly. And unlike a human reader, it doesn't just automatically autocorrect in its mind. It just sees an unknown word and might throw out the data.
Okay, so that's the clinical side. Messy, hasty, full of jargon. But surely the biologists, the ones naming the fundamental building blocks of life, surely they're more organized.
You would hope so.
Yeah.
But this brings us to what I call the naming nightmare. And honestly, this is where you realize scientists are just nerds with a sense of humor.
This section of the source material was gold. I assumed gene names were all like BCA12 or something very sci-fi.
Some are, but especially in genetics and specifically with fruit flies, Drosophila, the naming conventions are creative.
They name them based on what happens when the gene breaks, right? The phenotype.
Exactly. So there's a gene that, if it's mutated, makes the fruit fly have white eyes instead of red. So they named the gene white.
Simple enough.
But then you have the gene that makes the flies incredibly sensitive to alcohol. They pass out after just a tiny whiff.
And they named that.
Cheap date.
Come on, that's the scientific name.
That is the official scientific name. Cheap date. There's another one where the flies have trouble learning mazes. That gene is dunce.
Dunce. Okay.
Now, one where the brain structure is messy and splotchy, that one is pizza.
Oh no, imagine being the programmer. You tell the software, find all mentions of pizza in this biology paper, and it starts looking for pepperoni.
That is exactly the problem. It triggers false positives everywhere. The computer reads, the lab ordered pizza, and thinks it found a gene. But pizza is easy compared to the sevenless saga.
This sounded like a soap opera.
It is. So there's a gene involved in developing the fly's eye, the seventh photoreceptor cell. If the gene is broken, that cell is missing. So the gene is sevenless.
Logical.
But then they found a protein that binds to sevenless. So naturally, they named it bride of sevenless.
Of course.
And the gene downstream from that, son of sevenless.
It's incredible. But I can see why this is a nightmare for a search engine.
It gets worse. Those are funny, but they're unique words. The ultimate boss battle in Bio-NLP is the gene named the.
VTHE.
Yep. There is a gene named the, and another one named A.
No! How is that even possible to search for?
It's nearly impossible. The appears in almost every sentence. It's what we call a stop word. Usually, search engines just ignore it. Now imagine writing an algorithm that has to scan a sentence and decide if the is an article or a specific genetic sequence.
So finding the name is hard, but the notes mention that even if you find the name, you're not done. There's this concept of normalization.
Right, finding the word is step one. But let's say you find the term breast cancer associated 1 or BRCA1. The computer says, aha, I found a gene.
Success.
Not yet, because you have to ask. Which one? That gene exists in humans. It also exists in mice, in cows. It's in at least 22 different species. Each of those has a different ID number in the database.
So if the paper says, we studied the effects of BRCA1, the computer have to know if they were testing on mice or on people.
Correct. And if you get it wrong, you pollute the database. You could assign a mouse reaction to a human patient. It's dangerous. There's a symbol, TRP1. In humans alone, that one symbol refers to 5 different genes. 5.
So even if you know it's human, you're rolling a die.
Exactly. Without context, you have a 20% chance of being right.
It just seems like this endless puzzle of context. And we've mostly been talking about English, but science and medicine happen everywhere.
That's the next frontier. Multilinguality.
The notes mention that French and Spanish systems are getting pretty good.
They are. The Romance languages share enough structure with English that the models generalize pretty well. But then you have Bulgarian.
Why was Bulgarian singled out as the boss level?
It's a fascinating case study.
Yeah.
In a typical Bulgarian medical record, you don't just have one language, you have 3 layers. First, you have standard Bulgarian in the Cyrillic alphabet. Then, for drug names or certain diagnoses, they'll switch to Latin script, so English or Latin terms.
Makes 2 alphabets.
But then, and this is the kicker, they sometimes write English terms using Cyrillic letters. It's called transliteration. So you have a mashup of languages and scripts, all in the same sentence.
That sounds impossible to parse.
It's incredibly difficult, but we have to solve it because there are millions of patients whose data is locked inside those records. If we ignore them, we're leaving huge gaps in our understanding of global health.
And this brings us right back to the stakes we talked about at the beginning. This isn't just an academic puzzle. If this software fails, people can die.
That is the engineering reality. In Silicon Valley, the motto is move fast and break things. In Bio-NLP, if you break things, you might miss a lethal drug interaction. The source material really emphasizes that we need industrial strength testing. This can't be experimental code. It has to be bulletproof.
Speaking of high stakes, there was that connection to DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. We started with the Cold War, and we're circling back to defense. What is the big mechanism?
This is one of those connections that just makes you realize how universal information theory is. DARPA funded a massive project called Big Mechanism to study cancer signaling pathways.
Cancer signaling.
Basically, how cells talk to each other to spread cancer. It's a complex network of molecules. Molecule A talks to B, which triggers C. And DARPA realized something profound. Understanding a network of molecules in a cell is fundamentally the same mathematical problem as mapping a network of terrorists from intercepted emails.
Whoa, so tracking a tumor is like tracking an insurgent cell.
In terms of the data structure, yes, the actors are different, proteins versus people. But the way you figure out who is influencing whom requires the same kind of deep reading and network analysis. They're using the same algorithms to fight cancer that they use to dismantle terror networks.
That is wild. And speaking of our lives, the notes briefly touched on social media.
Yes, the new frontier. Researchers are now using NLP to monitor public health through Twitter, Reddit, forums.
Like tracking flu outbreaks by seeing how many people tweet, "I feel sick."
Exactly. Or, even more valuable, monitoring side effects of medications in real time. Sometimes patients will complain on a forum about a side effect long before they tell their doctor. If we can read that chatter, we can spot bad drug reactions months earlier.
It's amazing how far we've come. We started with Warren Weaver in 1949, worried about Russian journals. Now we're dealing with cheap date fruit flies and mapping cancer like it's a spy network.
It is a long journey, but I think the most important takeaway is what we alluded to earlier, reproducibility.
What do you mean by that in this context?
We live in an era where AI is everywhere, and BioNLP offers a chance to use this massive processing power for something strictly benevolent, alleviating human suffering. But that only happens if the science is solid.
Only if it works reliably.
Precisely. If the science isn't reproducible, if we can't trust that the computer interpreted cold correctly every single time, then we are just automating our own confusion.
We'd be making mistakes at the speed of light.
Exactly. The potential is limitless, but the rigor has to match the ambition. We are building a universal translator for the human body. We better make sure we're not mistranslating the instructions.
That is a powerful thought to end on. We have the tools to decode the library of life, but we have to read carefully. That's it for this deep dive. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on the next one.